BookTube, it's Becky from Becky Writes, this is Becky Reads, and this is my spoiler-free review of Lincon and the Bardo by George Saunders. This was the book that I chose to be my TBR Jar challenge book for the month of March. So my challenge was to read a book from a genre I don't normally reach for, and this book is definitely that. This is a piece of literary fiction, but it is also historical fiction that follows one night where President Abraham Lincoln spends in a bardo, which is kind of like a mausoleum, the night that his son dies, and they are preparing to inter him in the earth. There is a historical evidence that Abe Lincoln actually went after hours back to a graveyard after the funeral of his beloved son Willie, who died of typhoid, and spent some time probably with the body before it was buried. Now we have to remember that in this context, in the context of the first year of the Civil War, there weren't ways to preserve bodies like we have now. They didn't have morgues, and so bodies went very quickly from dying to being buried. There weren't lots and lots of days in between because bodies expired. So this is the story of the night that he visited his dead son. However, this is a kind of a bizarre little book because it is told from the perspective of the spirits who are watching all of this take place. These are the spirits that inhabit the graveyard and the bardo where young Willie is being taken. These are the spirits who are sharing their own stories as it overlaps with the story of Lincoln and his son Willie. And it is this interesting interplay of different times and places, different personalities, and what exactly causes a spirit to stay. Now I will say this book is kind of weird, and after I read the first 2 chapters, I wasn't 100% sure I was going to keep reading it. The way the story is written is untraditional, and I am not someone who prefers untraditional storytelling. The majority of the story is told from first-person perspectives of the spirits, except sometimes the spirits speak in the third person. It is very odd. This book also has interruptions to the spirit narratives and has what I believe are actual reflections of historical documents about the different time periods, reflections on who Lincoln is, reflections on the party which was going on the night that Willie died, reflections on how Lincoln was as a parent and what Willie was like in life, to kind of create a more full and more rounded world. And these sorts of historical document reflections break up the narratives told by the spirits. They're not very long reflections. They're 1 or 2 sentences. They're quite short. So it's lots of really short snippets told from different perspectives on what's going on. Some of them contradict each other. There is a scene where they're describing what Lincoln looks like, and in one sentence it says his eyes are blue, and in another it says his eyes are gray, and in another it says his eyes are brown. So there's an interesting sense of historiography going on, where we all remember that primary documents are, of course, subjective, and so if you are a good historian, you're looking at lots of different primary documents to get an accurate portrayal, and that's kind of what's going on here. And then you have the spirits who are telling both their own stories and reflecting on the stories of Lincoln and who he is and what his relationship is to them, since they may not have been in that other place, as they call the living world, while he was president. It's a really interesting smash up of different identities and stories, and this is very much a book of the stories and the stories of our lives and what is meaningful. This book definitely has magical realism. Obviously it's spirits telling the story of one night in a graveyard, and it has almost a Neil Gaiman-like quality. Like if Neil Gaiman decided to write literary fiction, like high literary fiction, this is something I can imagine him writing. It is a little bit creepy with the way that the spirits manifest themselves and some of the not goodness and the evilness that is there and what the afterlife may or may not be, but it isn't frightening. It's not terrifying in any way. It's just quite creepy, and it's an interesting kind of reflection on what the afterlife might be like, why people may choose to become a spirit rather than move on to the next stage of being, and what makes a life meaningful, right? What is it that we hold on to? What are the things that keep us enamored with the living? So here is how a lot of the pages are. Do you see how it's just a lot of conversations back and forth? Here you go. This is a section of the historical documents that he quotes. And then here is some more just conversation. So that is how it's written. There are very few places where there's bulk text. There's maybe 5 or 6 pages where you have actual full paragraphs of text. There's not a lot of that. It moves really quickly, but like I said, it took me a solid 50 pages probably before I was invested. And one of the reasons I did not DNF this and I was kind of on the edge for that first 50 pages was because I was on an airplane. I read the first 2 chapters before I left for a trip, and then I had this as my airplane book, and so I basically had to read it, and I'm really, really glad I did. The writing is a little weird because they don't always finish their sentences. Again, this is getting into the minds of the spirits. There's a little bit of graphic language that some of the spirits use. If that's something you're very sensitive to, just be aware, but it's quite minor. There's nothing overly graphic in my opinion. I wouldn't recommend this to like an 11 or 12-year-old, but like it's not violent or super graphic in any other way, but there is some swearing and things like that. I don't know how sensitive you guys are. I'm just letting you know. All in all, I have to say I really enjoyed this. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, and it surprised me. Again, I was not sure for that first 50 pages because the narrative style is so bizarre, and this book is so bizarre, and I was just not sure I was feeling it. But the more I read it, the more, one, I became completely enamored with George Saunders' writing style. His ability to capture a moment and the things that make us human and the things that we hold on to and we value in a human life was just, oh you guys, it was amazing. And it wasn't flowery, and it wasn't as though it was poetry. It was really rather that it was quite lean. There wasn't a lot of description. It was very lean, and there wasn't a lot of action that goes on, and I tend to like very action-packed escapist reads, but there was just something about the humanness of the story, and the magical realism of the spirits telling the story really works, and I quite liked this, and I would really, really recommend it. I will say again, the narrative style is weird. This is a bizarre little book, but it is a great read, and I so appreciated how odd and quirky this was. If you're a fan of Neil Gaiman and the Graveyard Book, this is kind of like a grown-up's graveyard book in some ways. It captures loss without being sad. I didn't need to cry at any point, but I felt the weight of sorrow. It captures a lot of humor. I chuckled in the airplane a couple of times reading this. It just was a very human book, and it's beautifully written, and it was 5 out of 5 stars. So if you guys are curious, this is a new release. It came out in February. I highly recommend it. It's worthwhile. It really, really is. So I hope you guys check out Lincon and the Bardo. Comment down below and let me know if you have read it. I would love to hear your thoughts if you've read it, or if you think you're going to read it, and what your thoughts are on magical realism and all of that stuff. I would really love your feedback. Alright you guys, I hope you're doing well, and I will talk to you later. Bye!